Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Bedford, President of the American Guild of Organists, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to the second evening of Leadership 2022, a very, very special event that has been organized for our chapters to enable them to meet together, to talk together, and to brainstorm and to share in this weird, weird time we are when we are experiencing this pandemic and it's nipping at our heels and we can't stop it. And so we're having to get very, very creative with how we do things. I'm very grateful to Elizabeth and to Molly and to Eric and to everyone who's had a hand in putting this evening together. I know it's going to be a wonderful time for you. You may have a misconception about what the hierarchy of the Organ Guild is. It does not begin with the national staff. It does not begin with the national officers and counselors or even the regional officers and counselors. It begins with the chapters. The chapters are at the top of the totem pole. If it weren't for the chapters, the staff, the counselors and officers, we wouldn't have anything to do. We would be totally useless. And so our chapters are so crucial to what we're doing, and they're doing so much to stay afloat and to keep alive and to keep everybody involved. And it's just really wonderful to see this because we are in a very, very difficult time. And we have been for a while, but we've learned to cope. We've learned that it's not going to be forever, but we're going to have to pull together and continue to make it work. And so I'm delighted to see you all this evening. I know that you're going to have a wonderful evening together. And please continue your great work. You make us proud every time we turn around. I'm just delighted to see what all is going on with our chapters. So continued success and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see some of you again who were here last night. And I want to welcome those who are here for the first time. We had a great session last night, lots of good ideas. I shared, and I won't go into the whole speech again, but I shared a little bit from an article that I'd read in the Wall Street Journal this past week about something called resilience fatigue that comes after prolonged periods of trying to stay positive. And they had this great analogy. It's like when you're running a marathon and you get to the 18th mile and you think, am I going to get to the finish line? But in this period, you're not only running your marathon to the 18th mile, but the finish line just keeps moving and moving and moving. So I want to thank all of you for staying positive during this time. I've seen the emails come and go about wonderful programs that you planned having to be canceled or better yet postponed. And that's what we want to think, is that they are going to be postponed, because I truly believe that we're on the uptick now and that things are going to get better. So hang in there, hang in there. We've got a lot of great topics tonight. Table topics for you to join. I think there are 27 of them, just about anything you can think of that you might encounter serving as a chapter leader. And we've got a couple of topics you may not have thought about. The one thing I would really like for you to think about tonight is, no matter what table you sit down at, if I was starting my chapter for the first time today, what would it look like? What would it feel like? What would I want to do, and what would I not want to do that we're currently doing in our chapter? So I want you to think about that, because when we come back for our closing session, I want to see some light bulbs, and I want to bring some people up on the stage so we can have a good dialogue. So now I have come to the fun part of this session, and I get to introduce our keynote. A native of Baltimore, Maryland, Arreon A. Harley-Emerson was appointed Director of Music and Operations of the Choir School of Delaware in June of 2013. In this position, he is responsible for the musical components of the renowned choir school program, as well as the day-to-day operations of the organization. Committed to the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, DEIB, Mr. Harley-Emerson has established a thriving consultancy, Equity Sings, where he helps arts and nonprofit organizations remain relevant in the 21st century. He also serves as national chair of the American Choral Directors Association's Diversity Initiatives Committee. He's an active native of Wilmington, Delaware, and he is also on the Delaware Arts Alliance's Board of Directors, where he serves as president of the board and chairs the Advancement Committee, which is tasked with fundraising, development, and most importantly, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Arreon A. Harley-Emerson.
Hello, everyone. I am so thrilled to be with you. I'm Arreon. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that warm welcome. I am just, again, so honored and pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you tonight about some of the issues that I am most passionate about, and that being access, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So tonight, I thought I would leave with you guys some musings. So I know we are all leaders, whether it's in various chapters that we have here, but we have to always remember, how do we include diversity in our practice? And what is diversity after all, right? There are so many different types of diversity, and it almost feels like it's a buzzword right now. But what does this really mean? What does this actually look like? So I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you tonight about these various different things. So you heard a little bit about me. So I absolutely love talking about diversity. And I have actually only worked professionally in settings that have mostly served Black and Brown students and communities. And that's where I have come from this work. So from the time growing up all the way through now, I really have been immersed in this language of inclusion, and it has really helped me to understand some things that I hope to share with you tonight. So first, GDL. GDL is one of my favorite things to say. GDL, what does it mean? What does it mean? It means that Google doesn't lie, right? So when you go and you do a Google search, it doesn't lie. It tells the truth, right? That's one of the things that we like about Google. It can't, tell us something that might not be true if we have the right search terms. So this morning, actually not even this morning, at approximately 3 o'clock today, as I was getting ready to talk to you, I thought that I would go to Google Images and I would Google the word organist. And I would want to just take a look at not what Google told me an organist was, but what does an organist look like? And so here is what I found. So seeing a couple of familiar faces here of some colleagues, but these are in succession. If you were to go into another tab right now, and you were to put into Google organist, these are the photos that would come up. And what I found to be extremely striking about that was the lack of diversity that we have. We have a little bit of gender diversity, could absolutely be greater with more women represented here. But overall, there was not a ton of diversity that we could see. Now, of course, I can't tell from these photos about all of the domains of diversity that can't be seen with the eye, right? There are many types of diversity that cannot be seen with the eye, but I thought that it was a really powerful image. Is this what we want Google to reflect in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? If we want this photo to look a little bit different, then that means that we might have to do some things a little bit differently. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we think about things a little bit differently? How do we approach this diversity work? It seems like everybody's an expert out there. Everybody has an opinion, but how do we actually bring about more diversity into our organization, into our chapters, into our outreach, right? So the first thing that I like to think about is this little quote here. This comes from Geneva Gay. She's a researcher, and she really comes from the education world. But what I love about her is when she talks about diversity, she doesn't talk about, oh, just diversity. She's more specific than that. She talks about culturally responsive practice. And I love that idea that we are all practitioners, that we are all having to practice and put work into what we're doing, that we're constantly growing and evolving as we continue to learn more from research and from others. And what she says about responsive practices is that these practices are validating, they're comprehensive, they're multidimensional, they are empowering, they are transformative, and ultimately they are emancipatory. And I absolutely love all of these incredibly strong, powerful words that conjure within us an emotional response, that conjure within us some sort of image and some sort of expectation. Now, there are a lot of acronyms that are out there. There's DEI, there's DEIB, there's BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. There's so many acronyms. And I thought I would throw at you yet another one. And this one is ADEIBR, right? It's a mouthful, right? And there could be a plus on the end of this, right? ADEIBR, and let's say there's a plus. But what you'll notice in the center of that is DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which many of us might understand. But what I've done here is I've reordered the letters into the steps that we must take in order for us to have successful diversity initiatives. So A is access. You can't have meaningful diversity without access. Then there's the D, which stands for diversity. E, equity. I, inclusion. B, belonging. And R, I'm going to wait to tell you what that is until we get through these other ones. So here I just put together a little pyramid to show you how we do this diversity work. How do we get people to feel like they belong in our organization? How will you get others to feel comfortable in your chapters? How do we do this work? Well, I like to think about it as access being the foundation. Because if you can't get in the door, then you can't get in the house, right? I'll say that again. If you can't get in the door, you can't get in the house. So it's really important that we have access. And access, we want to have access for our members. We want to have access for board members. We want to have access for participants, concert attendees, right? Patrons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But access is really the most, you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck by starting with access and creating more open channels for people to come into your chapter and into your practice. Then we have diversity. Once we've opened up the doors, we're going to invite people inside of those doors. We're going to invite people of a variety of different diversity domains, right? It could be racial and ethnic diversity. It can be gender diversity. It can be a whole host of diversity that we might seek to bring into our chapters and into our practice. And then once we have those people, we have to make sure that we have equitable policies and practices. So let me just talk about equity really quickly. We often understand equality, right? But equality and equity are not necessarily the same. So before I make the differentiation between those, let's take a look back at history. So when we first started thinking about equality, that was really in the early 1900s when it came for a woman's right to vote, right? Which we know we got in 1920. And at that time, there were a lot of campaigns that were built around equality. And then when we moved into the civil rights movement, we continued to use the word equality. And then when it came to the late 70s and the early 80s, we began talking about tolerance. Now, when I was growing up, tolerance was the big word in the 80s, right? So we talked about, oh, we need to be tolerant of people. And now today, that almost feels a little bit antiquated. Like, I will tolerate my neighbor, right? That just feels a little bit uncomfortable and perhaps even a little cringeworthy. And then we moved from the tolerance time into kind of general diversity, right, in the 90s, and we began to think about diversity, and it became more to our consciousness. And then we started talking about equity. So what's the difference between equality and equity? Equality is all about everyone being given the same resources to be able to succeed. And equity is about making sure that everyone has the allocated resources that they need to have an equal outcome. I'm going to say that again. So equality is about everyone having the same amount of resources, or being dealt the same hand, or having access to the same opportunities. And equity is about allocating the resources to each person so that they have the resources they need to have equal opportunity and equal success. And so it's important to understand that difference and that reframing of that term. Because once we understand that, we can say, oh, I get it. It doesn't mean what I thought it meant. It means I might need to do something a little bit differently so I can get some of these folks through the door. It's not about lowering a bar, but it might be that we need to do something to help other folks meet the standards that we have, help other folks walk through that door, right? So that's what we should be thinking about with equity. And then once we are treating people equitably and everyone has this equal opportunity in reality, then we're going to include them in charting a course forward. That means we are asking other people, what do you want to see? A lot of times we say, you know what, we want to give you a seat at the table, but we don't necessarily give everyone a voice at the table. So if we invite someone to the table, we have to give them two things, voice and choice. And so we have to think about, how do we give voice? And we have to think, how do we give choice? How do we give agency to those people? Because one of the most harmful things that we can do and how we can shut down conversation and impede our own practice is when we include other people, but we don't give them voice and we don't give them choice. And so that's really, really important for us to do. And when we have all of that, we foster a culture of belonging. And I like to call it a culture because it's something that we have to learn how to do. It's something that has to become ingrained in our practice, right? It is the culture that will permeate everything that we do. And we hope that everyone has this sense of belonging, this sense of ownership of the art form, this sense of ownership of the organization. And that's what we want, right? And that's why I like to reframe these letters A, D, E, I, and B, because it helps us to sequentially strategize what we need to be doing. Because if we try to do everything at once, we can't be successful. We can't try to boil the ocean. We have to be specific and intentional in our diversity initiatives. So think ADEI be as you begin to build those initiatives in your chapter. Now here, what we have is a picture of a broken vase. For me, I like to imagine I was walking past this vase and I might have brushed up against it and I caused it to fall over and to break. Now, if I just pick that vase up, have I fixed that vase? No, I have not. If I put that vase back right up again, the vase is still broken. But if it's something that I care about, I'm going to do something to repair that vase that is broken. And this here is the secret sauce. This here is what makes people successful and have a sustainable culture of belonging. And that's when we get to our R, which is restorative practice. Now, some people might have heard of restorative justice, particularly if you might have had some sort of experiences in education systems or schools, or some of you might have heard of restorative circles where something happened. And so we're going to get in a circle and we're going to talk about our feelings and how we're going to move forward in this situation, right? That's what a restorative circle is about. Or in restorative justice, which we are starting to see happen more frequently, there might be an offender and a victim might come together to talk about the offense and to talk about the remedy and how we move forward from this hurt, from this harm, from this crime, et cetera, fill in the blank of whatever word is there. And what we find is forgiveness. What we find is reconciliation. What we find is restoration, because we have taken the vase, not only have we picked it up, but we have repaired it. And repairing is an art. Restorative practice is an art. And so when we look at restorative practice, we have three things that we want to think about. We want to think about building and strengthening relationships. And when we build and strengthen those relationships, we want to be reaching out to communities. We want to be reaching out to people who might have been on the frays, in the margins, in the shadows, perhaps silenced, or maybe just never invited. We want to build and strengthen those relationships, and we want to be able to understand what are our shared values. And we want to start by, what is it that you value? And I can tell you, for us, it's pretty easy, right? We value music. We value music making. So we have something already baked in to our practice where we can begin to build relationships, facilitate strengthening relationships, right? So it's all there. Now then, what I like about restorative practice is this repairing, right? And that's what we're talking about. Not only are we picking up the vase, but we have to repair it. Restorative practice is different than restorative justice in the fact that restorative practice, we already understand that there is brokenness in the world. There is brokenness in this world. Everywhere we look, it is not just racially, it is about those who have not, those who are healthy, those who are ill. There is so much brokenness that is baked into our world. And in restorative practice, we acknowledge that it is our responsibility to leave this earth better than we found it. And that's what repairing relationships is about. How do we leave the art of organ performance better than we found it? How do we do that? What does that look like? Who needs to be in the room? What reconciliation needs to happen? What acknowledgement needs to happen? Most people just want an acknowledgement, right? That's what most people just need to be able to even begin that process of reconciling. And then there's this idea of re-entry. Once people have been on the outside, how do we bring them back in? How do we keep everyone accountable? How do we reintegrate folks? How do we let folks know that this is a space for them, right? It sounds easy, but it's not. It looks easy, but it's not. And here's the thing I will tell you, is that if it were easy, everybody would be doing it. And we wouldn't have a lack of diversity permeating the arts, not just the organ world, but the arts in general. So when I like to think about where do we start, where do we go from here? Starting to think about access, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and restorative practice. Acknowledging that there is brokenness in this world that we can heal and that we can uniquely heal as musicians and as organists. Now, there are kind of three areas where we can really begin to think about our practice and what we do. We can think about culturally relevant content, right? That's what we are performing. That's kind of like the low-hanging fruit repertoire, right? What are we performing? What music are we assigning? What are we teaching? If we're teaching folks, reference recordings are a big deal, and we want to be showing folks a diversity on the organ bench, right? So if there's an organ recording, let's also look for representation in that reference recording. So that's what culturally relevant content is about. It's about how do we have content, how do we have repertoire that is actually reflective of those future organists that we hope to be participants in our chapters and in our organization. Then we move over to this idea of culturally responsive pedagogy and teaching. So that's how are we teaching? Are we teaching in a way that is inclusive? When we decide that we are going to play music from differing traditions, is it a culturally valid offering? Is the performance practice appropriate? If our choirs are singing something or our spiritual, has that been done with the appropriate performance practice, right? Our culturally responsive pedagogy in our teaching is all about the presentation of the content. So once we have content that's representative of those that we wish to have in our organization, then we need to teach in a way that shows that inclusion. And that should be validating of culture, it should be transformative, and it should be emancipatory. And then there's everything else, which we put under culturally responsive practice. That is about the environment that we create. How do we communicate with our students? How do we communicate with our choir members? Do we have certain fees that we might need to reconsider? Is there truly equitable access to our organization? Do we need to reconsider? We need to consider those who might have been marginalized and those who might have been excluded for us to be able to analyze our responsive practice. And this is when I like to talk about institutional body language. What is institutional body language? Well, body language we know is it communicates something, though we don't have to speak it. So a lot of times we say we love diversity, we value diversity, but then our institutional body language might not align with which we say, right? It doesn't match what we write in our statements. We say we love diversity, we like this, we like that, but then when we see our programming, it might not look that way. When we look at our guests, organists and conductors and other musicians that we bring in, it might not look that way. It might not look that way when we think about access to our assessments, right? And then that's how we have to think about it. Does our institutional body language align with what we put out there in Word? And that's how we know that we have a great responsive practice. So this is what I'll leave with you, is this levers of change model. Here, there are a few steps that'll help you in thinking about how do I increase diversity and inclusion and access in my own chapter. First, we have to start with learning. We have to educate ourselves. We have to build awareness. And once we have done that intentional work, that learning, that education, then we have to lead. we are all leaders. We have to demonstrate that we are committed and that we have a commitment to this work. What I always like to say is leadership is commitment in action. Leadership is commitment in action. That's what leadership is. And our leaders have to take the first steps, and you have to prepare for resistance, because for every step that you take forward toward inclusion, there's always someone who's going to have some anxiety about what this might mean for them. Most people might think, well, if someone else gets more, then I might have less, or things might change. But I'm here today to tell you that the world is not like pie. If someone else has a piece, yours is not less, right? You don't have less pie because someone else has more. Equity is not about pie, y'all. It's about making sure that everyone has access. So we have to prepare for that resistance. And once we've done that, then we want to involve folks from the community, those who we want to seek out and to bring into the fold and give them voice and give them choice. And then we need to communicate that out and say, this is the direction in what we're going. We have resolve to do this. And then we need to set some goals, and we need to measure how we are doing. And it's not just numbers of, oh, I have this many of this kind of person and that many of that kind of person. No, it should really be a 360 look. What does our programming look like? Not just what our members look like, but how many hours are people engaged in this kind of work? There are many things that we can measure to show that we are progressing. And once we are measuring, we want to begin sustaining. And so we want to refresh our goals. When we fall short of our goals, we want to acknowledge those shortcomings and ask for help. And if we are feeling great about what we've done, we go on to the next specific thing and we start back at the learning stage. And if we have perhaps fallen short of our goals, we go back to the learning stage, because clearly there is more that we need to learn. And then this cycle, we go over and over and over again, but to more depth. A greater level of depth each time, and a greater level of understanding. So as we conclude today, what I just want to talk about is, first, leadership is commitment in action. What are you doing? What are you going to do tomorrow? Tomorrow is the beginning of your diversity initiative. How is it that you are going to make the next time we Google organists, how do we make that picture look differently? How do we really reach those potential participants? And that's what I like to say. Our responsibility is not to those who are just here, but those who have the potential to be here. And who are those folks? Let's go out and let's find them. And let's use this framework to guide our work, beginning with access, then building diversity, then equity, inclusion, belonging, and then restorative practice. Let us always remember that we must leave this world better than we found it. Thank you.
Wow. Powerful, powerful words. Arreon, thank you so much.
My
I
pleasure.
think we've thought about this, but we just haven't put them into action. And learning, leading, involving, communicating, measuring, sustaining, and just continuing that cycle. And leadership is commitment in action. And I know we want to do that. We want to do that. I think we struggle with how to get started. We have a question from someone in the audience. Molly, can you bring Betsy up to the stage? Betsy, would you like to be brought to the stage?
Yes.
I think she's coming. Okay, I think, is your mic on, Betsy?
Yes, it is. And there's my picture.
Good.
So this is just giving me so many ideas. We're getting ready to do pedal pipes and pizza at the U.S. Naval Academy in May. And my church is right in Annapolis and very active in ministry with a neighborhood center of, one of the neighborhoods with a lot of people of color. And I'm just thinking we really need to go into that community center and the schools, the public schools there, and reach out and find middle school pianists, whether they just play by ear, maybe they don't even take lessons yet, and invite them and get them to come attend this event. Because a place like Annapolis, I suspect there's a lot of those children with this gem of the chapel at the U.S. Naval Academy who have never stepped foot in there and experienced that music. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Betsy. Anybody else? I will tell you, Arreon, boy, were there thumbs ups and hearts just floating up when you were talking. It's pretty amazing. Well, I think you've given us a lot really to think about and to act on. I see more hearts. So if there are no other questions, I'm just going to say thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. We need to act now on all of the things that you've shared with us tonight. And I think that you have lit the fire within us to be able to do that and to follow up. Oh, we have another raised hand. John Apple?
Yes. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can.
Okay. How do you get people who are not motivated to involving their own membership? We have a chapter of 175 people that many of which do not participate actively within amongst their own constituency. And then secondly, trying to get beyond your constituency to other arts organizations, to other people who don't function in any way really of participating in the arts.
This is a really great question. Yeah, thank you, John, for that question. So first of all, one of the things that I always think that a lot of times we automatically think that we have a diversity issue, and it might sometimes be an engagement issue. Sometimes we just have engagement issues, right? So we all know that sometimes that you look at the role in the roster, you're like, wow, I have 175 people in the chapter, but I only ever see 20, right? So that already should be an indication of relevance. And so that means that we need to be thinking, is the programming that we are doing relevant? And that's just one piece of that. Now, when we want to also bring in more kind of like diverse populations and we have some specific goals, like how do we motivate people to want to do this work? The very first thing that I always say to folks is, you got to make it a business imperative. You have to make sure that people don't feel ashamed by the work, number one, and guilty about the work. And two, the other thing that we have to do is show that it is a business imperative. Sometimes we just have to be like, hey guys, let's look at the numbers. If we don't do this diversity work, we aren't going to have an AGO, right? In 50 years or 75 years. Like if we take a look at even just population trends, like what do we need to do to self-preserve this art form, right? And we're aware of it with just, we know there are fewer organ majors. We know that there are fewer sacred music majors. And we know that that's of concern. That's of concern. But if the population continues to diversify and we want to get a larger percentage of that population, what do we need to be doing differently? How do we remain relevant? And so that's the word that I always like to use, is relevant programming is what we need to get to create, to have engagement. And that engagement goes across the board. And if we think about it, it's not just with diversity, it's with all programming, right? How do we make the organ relevant? How do we make the study of organ relevant? How do we make the instrument relevant, right? And those are all questions that we should be asking, because it is sustainability, it is survival of the art form. And so that's what I often start there, is that, do you love this? Do you want to see young organists playing in 25 years? So what are you doing today, What are you investing today to ensure that that happens? And that's where I always like to start from that. And then I always like to come back to this idea of pie, is that a lot of people are not motivated because there's fear. And there's a fear that if we will lose Bach if we do some of these other things. But I think assuring people that, you know, that's not the case. That is not, we are not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We are not saying, let's burn all of the canon. Nobody is saying those sorts of things. And I think we have to assure people that the level of excellence is not being lowered. It's only expanding. There is so much excellence to be found in this world. There's such beauty, and it is so incumbent upon us to expand our very definition of what artistic excellence means. So I think by starting with what we all love and then growing it out from there, that's what I found to be the most motivational for people to engage in the work.
Thank you. Thank you. We do have Leslie Wolf-Robb. Leslie, come on up to the stage.
There we go. Thank you so much for the challenge and the tools. I really appreciated what you said about that what we need to be asking people is, do you love this? Do you want the organ to be alive and well? And organists, for there to be organists 20 years from now, 40 years from now, when some of us are no longer here to play. And my question is, I took notes as fast as I could while you were talking this evening, but you talk faster than I can write. And I'm sure people have that experience when I talk too. And I hope that you'll make either the recording of this or a transcript of what you said available to us so that we can take it back to our chapters, so that those of us on National Council can really dig in and wrestle with what you've shared with us this evening, because I think it's exactly what we've needed to hear and what we need to work on.
I'd be happy to send the slides, and I believe the recording should be available as well.
It will. Thank you so much. And Leslie is our counselor for communications, and who has been chomping at the bit for us to become active. So thank you, Leslie. Is there anybody else that wishes to ask Arreon anything? Okay, well, I think we just have a lot to think about. Arreon, thank you so very much. We feel really blessed to have had you here tonight, and motivated. And we're going to do things. We are. So you take care. I know you've got you're presenting. You've got something else that you're presenting.
Yeah.
He's a busy guy.
It's been a crazy week. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. You take care and be well. And all the hearts are flying up. We love you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care. All right. So, wow. Really powerful. Yeah, we will have a recording. I'm going to ask him for the slides. And what a great recording to play at a chapter program. I can't think of a better thing to do. Some announcements. Drum roll. The winner of bingo is Mr. Zach Boyer, the subdean of the Charlotte chapter, and he also serves on the Committee for Membership Development and Chapter Support, and he is part of Agoya. So let's give a round of applause or a thumbs up to Zach. Zach, we found online, I think, something kind of cool. It's a very portable Bluetooth speaker that you can kind of take with you anywhere, that's supposed to have really good sound. So we will be sending that to you, and congratulations. Speed networking is an art of its own. It is really, really difficult. So kudos to you and for everybody for sticking with it. I'm really proud of you. So we're going to go back now into the social lounge. And as I said, there will be table topics. Keep scrolling down because there are going to be a lot of them, and you won't see them all. You'll just see 3 tables on your screen. So you got to use your mouse, and you got to keep scrolling down. And as I said, sit down, start a conversation. If you want to get up and go to another table, that's fine. But I encourage you all, when you do sit down, and I know that the facilitators will want to know who you are, your name, your chapter, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go have some fun. And in about 45 minutes, we'll bring you back here. Okay? Thank you.